course, that because Yahya Sinwar is no more, that the war in Gaza will end, and the other conflicts around the region that are linked to it by the militant groups fighting against Israel, that they'll also automatically end as well. That said, I think many people in the region see this as a kind of glimmer of hope that you could see a pathway now, a diplomatic pathway forged with him no longer there, that could lead to a calming of tensions throughout the region, and then ultimately the end of violence. But how you get to that is extraordinarily complex. Take Gaza, for instance, with Yahya Sinwar no longer there. Who do you even negotiate with? Who do you talk with? Remember that the diplomacy in Gaza has, it's moribund at the moment. Nobody is talking to anybody about a ceasefire. That's one part of it. With Hezbollah here, it's been severely weakened by the Israelis. Hassan Nasrallah, its leader, was assassinated in a massive blast in Dahir, not far from where I am standing talking to you tonight. But the war will carry on in the south. Hezbollah has said it's not going to give up its fight. It will continue to rain rockets down on Israel as long as the fighting carries on in Gaza. And from the Israeli perspective, they're not going to want to go back to the status quo of October the 6th, where they have, a significant militia armed to the teeth on their border, pointing their rockets at guns at Israel. It might very well be that they use this moment to continue pressing forward, to continue weakening the group, so that their hand is much stronger when this does ultimately become a form of negotiation. And then there's the Iranian question as well. What about Iran's behaviour in the region? Are they going to carry on sponsoring, funneling money to militant groups that are swearing the end of what they call the Zionist entity? All of that, of course, is still up for grabs. It's undecided. So how does all of that end? We don't know. And then I suppose there is the even larger question still. You take the sting out of all of this crisis dies down, but the kind of radioactive core that drives this conflict still remains. And that, of course, is the Palestinian question that, has been there and has been a thorn in sort of international relations since the creation of Israel in 1948. What do you do about the Palestinians? How do they achieve a situation where the resistance, they no longer feel the need that they want to continue with resistance? Israel has pretty much ruled out the possibility of two states. If there's not two states, what does that kind of resolution look like? And that's probably not going to change. You're going to end up with a situation that you did have before October the 6th, which is kind of managing the conflict. And then, of course, you have the spectre of more hideous and terrible events sometime in the future. So all of that remains very unresolved. But certainly, I think people here in Lebanon are hoping that this may just be the beginning of the end of this crisis. But how you get to that end point, is still incredibly dangerous and is still very much unresolved.
And Alex, we're just hearing that the Lebanon toll from more than a year of conflict with Israel has risen to 2,412 people killed, 11,285 wounded. That's the latest from the Lebanese Health Ministry. Looking at things more locally now, what's the latest on those operations by Israel against Hezbollah?
Well, what is unfolding in Lebanon is an absolute disaster. It is a catastrophe. Aid agencies are worried, very fearful of the deteriorating humanitarian situation here. There's talk of possible outbreak of cholera. Many people are living on the streets. Let me give you this figure, Jonathan. More than 1 million, about 1.2 million people, this is according to the United Nations, have been displaced by the fighting. That is kind of heading towards a quarter, certainly a fifth of Lebanon's population are now displaced from their homes. Many of those people are living on the streets here in the capital, Beirut. It's a vibrant city in ordinary times, despite the multifaceted crises it's faced over the years. But, you don't have to walk far from where I am here. Just go along the Corniche and you'll find multiple families living under cardboard or under plastic, and that just goes on for mile after mile along the Corniche. Go to any of the open areas here, the parkland, you'll find a similar situation. It's the same if you go south to places like Sidon. Again, so many people have been displaced from this fighting. In terms of the actual clashes between Hezbollah and Israel, they're pretty fierce down on the border. And of course, the airstrikes that we have seen from Israel inside Lebanon, they have expanded in recent days, now really spanning the length and breadth of the country. It's left many people here asking the question. We've left our homes, we've taken heed of evacuation orders. These are the orders that Israel issues to say, you're next to a Hezbollah site, you need to move. They've moved from those areas, but the areas that they've moved into have also been bombed. So they ask the question, they look you in the eye and say, where can we go? Where is now safe? This is an absolute disaster here. But of course, people are hoping with the announcement that Yahya Sinwar has been killed by the Israeli forces, that there just might be an end in sight. The caveat, of course, is that that is not an absolute given. There are many reasons why the fighting could still continue.
OK, Alex, for that analysis. Thank you. Alex Rossi in Beirut there for us. Let's bring in Firaz Maqsad, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Good to get you with us, get your thoughts on this developing story. Israel's most wanted man is dead. Just explain the significance for us.
Well, Jonathan, it's very significant. Yahya Sinwar has been the de facto leader of Hamas since the previous leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in Iran, in the Iranian capital, Tehran, earlier this summer. He also has been the effective commander on the ground and the mastermind of the October 7th attack that left some 1,200 Israelis dead. So this is a very significant moment. And senior White House officials that I've been talking to have reached the conclusion, rightfully or wrongfully, that without Sinwar being dead, without Sinwar killed, there's unlikely to be movement towards a ceasefire in Gaza. And so what follows is that this is a moment of opportunity. There is a fork in the road ahead of us. There's a potential now for a de-escalation in Gaza, which then would unlock a potential de-escalation in Lebanon, because we all know that Iran and Hezbollah had premised a de-escalation in Lebanon and a potential ceasefire on first getting to a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the man in the driver's seat here is not in the White House. The man in the driver's seat is in Israel. It is the Israeli Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. Will he pocket the victory? Would he pocket this win, declare victory, and end to major operations in Gaza, and then negotiate to get to a deal that releases these hostages, the 101 Israeli hostages held in Gaza, and then potentially in Lebanon? That's the million-dollar question there. And my sense is that Netanyahu is not eager and has much bigger war aims here.
The other side of that coin, though, is that we could well see more violence, which could involve the fate of the hostages. Hamas, now that this has happened, may seek revenge on Israel, and it could be the hostages that pay a terrible price for that.
Yeah, I mean, think what you may about Hamas or some of these other violent organizations out there. They are not suicidal. They tend to think strategically. They understand, as horrible as it might sound, the value of these hostages and also the value of keeping them alive, much more valuable keeping them alive than having them dead. So I don't think that they're going to be prone for kind of mass revenge here taken against these hostages. I think what we are going to see, though, however, is a transition period. Hamas is going to have to cope with this debilitating blow that they've been dealt. And I don't think that they will automatically figure out who's going to be in command next on Gaza. And so that will pose a challenge, a logistical challenge in terms of a point of contact for negotiations moving forward. But as we saw with Hezbollah, the killing of its secretary general, those kind of killings tend to have a short-term, significant tactical, though, impact on these organizations. In the medium to long term, they tend to regenerate and replace those fallen leaders.
We're expecting to hear from Benjamin Netanyahu shortly. We're going to take that live once he begins to address the Israeli people. What do you think he will say? What do you think his thoughts are now moving forward?
Yeah, no doubt, Jonathan, a big day, a huge victory for the Israeli prime minister, somebody who's taken much pride in being known and dubbed as Mr. Security. That image was very much tarnished as a result of what Yahya Sinwar did on October 7th, that attack under Bibi Netanyahu's watch, and a huge intelligence failure there on behalf of Israel. So this is a moment for Benjamin Netanyahu to resuscitate his image as Mr. Security. The question, as I mentioned, is what happens next? Are really the goals of Bibi Netanyahu here, on one hand in Gaza, to secure the release of the hostages, and on the other hand in Lebanon, to return some 60,000 Israelis that have been displaced from their homes in the north to these homes? Or is it the broader objective here that he senses an opening to reset the table in the region vis-a-vis Iran, the balance of power with Iranian-sponsored groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, potentially the Houthis in Yemen, and then Iran itself with a much-anticipated Israeli response to Iran in the coming days. So I think it's going to be interesting to see which way he goes. My sense is that he has broader goal aims in mind, and not just the killing of Sinwar.
OK, and in terms of which way Hamas goes, you can kill Sinwar, but you can't kill an ideology, can you? You can't eradicate the ideology, which is Hamas.
That is precisely the case. And then you'll find many who will argue that, in fact, the Palestinian population of Gaza, after some estimated 40,000 plus that have been killed, many of them civilians, women and children and men, that this population is only further radicalized by the experience of what has happened since October 7th. And so then if you don't replace Hamas, if you don't have a plan and a realistic plan that works for the day after, what to replace Hamas with, then even a more extreme version will rise to fill that vacuum, given the anger, the frustration, and the pain of the past year experienced by the Palestinians. So again, a fork in the road, a moment of opportunity for de-escalation should Netanyahu want to take that diplomatic off-ramp, but a lot of uncertainty still as to whether this will go in a more positive direction, or that we're still in an open and uncertain war.
Well, interesting you say that, because as you're speaking, we've just heard that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has confirmed Sinwar's death, as we know, but he says that he was evil and evil has been delivered a blow. But, and this is key to what you've just been saying, but our task is not complete. So if we think we're heading to negotiation, if we think we're heading to peace in the next few days, maybe that simply isn't the case.
Yes, and I was very intrigued listening to your Israeli guest that was on before me, saying that his government essentially forewent some 18 attempts at a ceasefire, some of which were realistic and at hand. I think that kind of all lends itself to this thinking that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, thinks of himself as a historic figure, and in many ways have dubbed this sort of Israel's second independence. This is being as significant for him as the War of Independence in 1948. And those kind of things do not seem to indicate that he is looking to wind operations down. I do think, however, that there is a role for the American administration to play, limited as it might currently be, in bringing pressure on Netanyahu to choose one path over the other. And so potentially Netanyahu would want to wind down Gaza and wind down the campaign in Lebanon. But I would think that he would only do so to further focus on the coming confrontation with Iran, the direct confrontation, which is a whole different ballgame, and it poses a different kind of danger on itself.
Yeah, very useful getting your thoughts as we try to understand the implications of this breaking news. Firaz Maksad, Senior Fellow at Middle East Institute, really good to get your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching the News Hour. Let's remind you of the breaking news tonight. Israel says it has killed the leader of Hamas. The Israel Defense Forces said in a statement in the last hour, IDF soldiers from the Southern Command eliminated Yahya Sinwar the leader of the Hamas terrorist organisation, in an operation in the southern Gaza Strip. Yahya Sinwar planned and executed the October the 7th massacre, promoted his murderous ideology both before and during the war, and was responsible for the murder and abduction of many Israelis. That from the IDF in the last few minutes. A warning, we are about to show you an image from the scene of the Israeli military operation in Gaza, which some may find distressing. The image appears to show Israeli soldiers at the scene of the attack with the body of a man believed to be Yahya Sinwar in the rubble. Well, he'd led Hamas in Gaza since 2017 after joining its ranks in the early 1980s. He spent more than 20 years in prison for killing Israelis and Palestinians suspected of collaborating with Israel. He was released in 2011 as part of a swap of more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, who had been held hostage by Hamas for more than 5 years. Sinwar survived an assassination attempt in 2021 when an Israeli airstrike was reported to have hit his home. Israel believes he was one of the architects of the 7th of October attacks, which killed 1,200 people. Since then, Sinwar had been at the top of Israel's most wanted list. Let's go straight to Jerusalem. Join our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, once again. We're expecting to hear from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A huge day, personally, for him. He's been after Sinwar for more than a year.
Yeah, and in his message, he delivers a call to the people of Gaza, but also the people of the Middle East to free themselves from Hamas, free themselves from Hezbollah. He makes the point that Israel has successfully hunted down key leaders from Hezbollah and from Hamas. Ismail Haniyeh, the leader that they killed in Tehran, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, who they killed recently in Beirut, and other senior Hamas leaders, culminating in the assassination of Yahya Sinwar yesterday. And he says that anybody who is holding the hostages in Gaza, if they lay down their arms and if they hand the hostages over, they'll be allowed to go free. So the message from Netanyahu is one to the Israeli people, but also one to the wider Middle East, to try and convince them that Israel is attempting to bring peace to the region, but in doing so, that involves considerable fighting in Gaza, in Lebanon and elsewhere, because of course we still have the backdrop of the potential retaliation against Iran. So this is a major significant moment in the war in Gaza today, but Hamas is more than one person. It still remains more than one person. And I don't think that this will, in the short term, bring about the end of the fighting in Gaza. There are still 96 hostages in Gaza who were taken on October the 7th. The Israelis still need to find a way to get them out, whether that is through military means or negotiation. But the negotiations between all sides have broken down and have really been defunct now for many weeks. Whether or not this gives an opportunity to resume those.
Alistair, I'm just going to interrupt. Benjamin Netanyahu is speaking. Let's listen in.
The tabernacles. Yahya Sinwar prepared his last-minute preparations for the massacre of the 7th of October. I'm standing here today to tell you that he has been killed. He who killed and caused the worst massacre ever since the Holocaust. He was killed by our soldiers, our heroic soldiers, and we have finished our accounts with him, but the mission ahead of us has not been completed. Dear families of the hostages, this is a very important moment in the war. We will continue with all our strength until all your dearly beloved hostages that we love so much will be brought home. It is our commitment. It is a supreme commitment. Sinwar really destroyed your lives, and I'm telling all of you in the Gaza. But he was hiding in a little dark cave, and he was killed when he was running away from our soldiers. This is the end of the evil rule of the Hamas, and I'm telling you in a clear-cut manner, Hamas will no longer rule Gaza Strip. This is the day after that. Now, it is your opportunity to be freed of his tyranny. And I'm telling you now, all your leaders will be eliminated. So just remember that. But those who will bring back our hostages, they will be saved. But those who will hurt our hostages, believe me, their days are numbered. The return of our hostages is an opportunity to really bring them home and really solve everything. The light is coming up, the dark is retreating. Hakila, all of them have been eliminated. I'm calling upon you, the people of this region. It is a wonderful opportunity to thwart the axis of evil and to bring burgeoning and flourishing of this area. We have to bring this blessing to all of us. Now it is clear to everyone why we stubbornly continued fighting and why we said we have to go to the stronghold of the Hamas in Rafah. Why we said, because that is where the arch murderer was hiding. I would like to salute all the GSS, the IDF, all of them. There is no better than them. And now it is clear more than ever before that the good will prevail over the evil. And believe me, the war has not ended yet. It is hard. And yes, we are paying heavy prices. And I would like to express from the depth of my heart my mourning and my condolences to the families who have lost their dearly beloved. Your and their sacrifices are bringing us to the victory. And in the words of David, our king, you will see that this will happen. There are so many challenges yet ahead of us. We have to really wait and be brave, and we have to continue courageously fighting and standing strong, steadfastly, and we will win. The citizens of Israel, we celebrated Sukkot just last year. During those moments, he was preparing the 7th of October, that horrendous massacre. I am standing here today to announce, to notify you that he has been killed. Yahya Sinwar, he who killed and prepared the worst massacre ever of our people since the Holocaust. He was killed by our heroic soldiers. And today we have finished our accounts with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home, because that is our supreme commitment, my supreme commitment. And to the people of Gaza, I am telling you that Sinwar told you that, in fact, he was reigning and doing so well, but, in fact, he was hiding in a little dark cave. But now that he has been eliminated, you will see that there will be a decline of the evil and they will no longer reign over Gaza. This is the beginning. This is the day after Hamas now. It is now an opportunity for you to be released and freed of his tyranny. And to you, the Hamas, believe me, the leaders, they can never flee us. They will be eliminated. But for those who are willing to lay down their arms from the Hamas and free the hostages, Believe me, they will be saved. But those who do not, their days are numbered if they dare hurt any of the hostages. It is now bringing about the end of the war, and to the people of the region, Gaza, Beirut, and the whole region, the dark is now retreating. The light is coming out. Nasrallah, Akil, and so many of their other comrades, their days are numbered. They are no longer here. It is an opportunity for us to thwart that evil and bring about a positive future, one where we will be able to see how a blessing will be upon us. And now it is clear to all of us here in Israel and abroad why we stubbornly said, despite all the pressure wielded on us, that we will not stop the war and we will go into Rafah, because that is where the Ark murderer and so many of his other comrades were hiding. I would like to salute the IDF and the GSS. There are no better than them for their valor. And we have shown again how the good can prevail over the evil. But the war has not ended, and it is a hard war, and we're paying heavy prices. But I would like to express my condolences to the families who have lost their dearly beloved members of their families, and their sacrifices have brought us closer to the victory. And in the words of David the King, we will continue chasing our enemy until we have eliminated them all. Now, this is a war for resurrection. There are many challenges ahead of us. We need to stand steadfastly. We need valor, and we need to be resilient. But with the help of God and all of us together, unified, we will win.
That was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressing the Israeli people. The main lines are, he confirmed Sinwar's death and said evil has been delivered a blow, but our task is not complete. We will continue full force until our hostages return. He spoke directly to the people of Gaza. Sinwar has ruined your lives, he said. Hamas will not rule Gaza. This is an opportunity for Gaza's people to free themselves from its tyranny. The Prime Minister saying the war is still not over, but light is prevailing over darkness. Well, let's bring in Yosi Alfha, former official in Mossad. Good to have you with us and get your reaction to this news. It appears, and details are pretty sketchy, that troops were involved in a firefight and came across Sinwar's body rather than it being intelligence-led. What are your contacts telling you about the circumstances leading up to his killing?
First of all, I have no contacts who can tell me what went on in that firefight. The Mossad is not involved in the war in Gaza. The General Security Service is. And I take at face value the claim that the troops didn't know that Sinwar had surfaced from his tunnel and got lucky and killed him, which is perhaps a fitting ending for him. Intelligence wasn't involved here, at least according to what we've been told so far.
Why has it taken so long, do you think, more than a year, to get Israel's most wanted man?
He was a very clever enemy. And he understood the necessity to hide deep in tunnels, in a huge, very extensive network of tunnels that he built under our noses without our intelligence telling us really quite how deep and extensive it was. And he exploited it very well. So he was a smart operative who finally made a mistake.
What will his death mean in Gaza itself? Will many Gazans mourn him?
Look, this is the big question, not so much how the Gazan public will relate, but how Sinwar's Hamas buddies will relate to this. And if you listen closely to Netanyahu, he related to this. He basically said Gazans who now understand the need to end this war will be rewarded. And Gazans who try to take revenge for Sinwar are going to be punished. And that reflects, at this very early stage, the assessment that either direction is possible. Revenge against hostages, or Gazans saying enough. Let's end this, and let's try to end this and get the best deal we can. The sense is that the Netanyahu government will hopefully now take advantage of this event to, via Qatar and via Egypt, offer Hamas some sort of deal to end this and rescue the hostages being without a doubt, far and away, the most important issue for Israel from a moral and security and national standpoint. Whether there's anybody to communicate with in Gaza, a situation somewhat similar to what we have in Lebanon now that Hassan Nasrallah has been removed. So whether there's anyone to communicate with, and whether whoever is taking over from Sinwar, it could be his brother, is going to be more ready to compromise and release the hostages in order for some sort of considerations from Israel, or quite the opposite, whether we're going to see more violence now.
Yeah, we will find out, no doubt, in the coming hours and days. We are short of time, so I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but we are really grateful for you coming on the programme. Yosi Alfha, former official in Mossad, thank you. We're going to go straight to political analyst Yousef Mona now, who's the head of Palestine-Israel programme at the Arab Centre in Washington. As we approach the end of the hour, it'd be great to get your thoughts. What was your initial reaction when you heard about the death?
Right. Well, thank you. You know, I think in moments like this, there's a certain fascination with the killing of leaders that makes it very easy for people to forget that what we are witnessing is a clash between movements that is much bigger and older than any one individual or series of them. And of course, because of the past year, this clash is only primed to continue and to escalate. If you listen to Yahya Sinwar himself over the years, he has talked about his desire to have a death one day that is on the battlefield confronting Zionism. And it seems from what we have learned over the last several hours that is, in fact, what has transpired. I think one of the things that's unique about his death in comparison to other leaders is that this was not an assassination, as has been the case with many, many Hamas leaders before him, and Hezbollah leaders as well, and other leaders of Palestinian factions over the years. But rather, this was a death in the course of battle. And that is one thing that I think raises a number of questions about why and how and so on. In the big scheme of things, though, Yahya Sinwar is going to be another in a long list of leaders before him, and likely a long list of leaders to come of Palestinians who take up the torch of resistance to Israel, precisely because Palestinian resistance to Zionism in Palestine is as old as Zionism is in Palestine. Along with Yahya Sinwar today, we saw many other people who were killed as well, including a child in the Arub refugee camp in the West Bank, a woman picking olives in Jenin, and scores of Palestinians in Jabalia and elsewhere in the Gaza Strip as well. It is for these reasons that over the long term, Yahya Sinwar is going to be part of a long list of Palestinians who will continue to push back against what Israel is doing to them.
Yeah, and Yousef, I'm sure you were listening as we were to Netanyahu speaking a few moments ago. I was struck by the contradiction, in a way, in his speech. On the one hand, talking about this being a chance to bring peace and prosperity. On the other hand, saying that the war will continue with full force. It's impossible to know, isn't it, which direction things will go?
Well, I think it's quite clear that the Israelis are not leaving the Gaza Strip anytime soon. In fact, we heard as much from a number of former officials in Israel today, including Benny Gantz a little while ago, saying that the Israeli military will continue to operate in Gaza for years to come. There's a insurgency that is going on now, continued resistance to the presence of Israeli soldiers in Gaza by Palestinians there. That's unlikely to change. And even if the killing of Yahya Sinwar creates some kind of opening for a hostage deal and exchange, it's unlikely that the Israeli military is going to leave the Gaza Strip. And there is not going to be any major shift in the situation on the ground there because there is no alternative government at the moment. There doesn't seem to be one that will come about, and no,
it really doesn't. I'm so sorry, Yousef. We are running out of time, so I'm going to have to pause things there. But thank you very much indeed, political analyst Yousef Mona. Well, that's the latest on the breaking news this evening, that Israel has confirmed the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. The conflict in the Middle East continues, and today 15 UK charities have launched an urgent fundraising appeal as the humanitarian crisis worsens across the region. The organisations which make up the Disasters Emergency Committee have been providing food, shelter and medical care across the Middle East, but they say the scale of need is overwhelming.
The scale of loss across the Middle East in the last year is staggering.
Millions of civilians in Gaza and Lebanon are facing a catastrophic humanitarian situation.
The biggest impact is being borne by the tens of thousands of children in a conflict not of their making.
Our support can help save so many.
This is why we need to act now. In Gaza, lives have been devastated. Almost the entire population have had to flee their homes. Their suffering increases daily. And a desperate shortage of food means there is a risk of famine across the Gaza Strip. So the level of need is vast. And the most vulnerable do not have a future without urgent help.
كان في المية يجي أمراض فينا عشان المية مش منيحة، كانت ملوثة.
فيش إلها الغذاء المناسب، رضعتي مش كافية إلها، فيش عنا الحليب. نحن الوضع عنا مش منيح.
As the casualties continue to rise in their tens of thousands, life-saving equipment and medicines are critically short. The lack of clean water for drinking and washing is increasing the risk of disease for all those displaced without adequate shelter. In Lebanon, more than 1 million people have also been displaced, forcing people to sleep in open spaces, as hospitals struggle to treat the thousands of their injured.
In Gaza and Lebanon, DEC charities and local partners are on the ground. But the need for international help, our help, is critical to saving lives. You can donate online at dec.org.uk by calling 0330 123 0333, by texting SKY to 70676 to give £10, or by sending a cheque to this address. Just £10 could provide blankets for 2 displaced people.
£50 could provide food for 5 families for 1 week.
And £100 can provide emergency shelter for them.
At times like these, we can often feel powerless.
But each one of us has the power to make a difference.
And give those suffering a chance at a future.
So please, donate now.
day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first. Hello, good evening. We start tonight in the Middle East, where Israel has confirmed Hamas's top leader has been killed in a military operation in southern Gaza. Yahya Sinwar was one of the chief architects of the October 7th attack on Israel last year and has been their main target since the conflict began. A warning that we're about to show an image from the scene of the Israeli military operation in Gaza that some may find distressing. Well, this image appears to show Israeli soldiers at the scene of the attack with the body of a man believed to be Yahya Sinwar in that rubble. In the last few minutes, we've heard from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said the death of Yahya Sinwar offers a chance of peace in the Middle East, but he warned the war in Gaza is still not over.
He was killed by our heroic soldiers, and today we have finished our accounts with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home.
Benjamin Netanyahu speaking there. Well, we can go live now to Jerusalem and our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. Alistair, it feels like the question that so many people will be asking tonight is, could this be the beginning of the end of the war Or is that, frankly, naive?
Yeah, I don't think we're at that stage. I think this is, I mean, it is very significant, and I think it could have significant repercussions. I don't think we are looking at the end of the war in Gaza, at least not in the short term. Israel still has 101 hostages in Gaza, and it needs to negotiate their release or find them and free them through military means. Neither of those options are going to be quick options. And secondly, Israel still needs to fight Hamas. Hamas is more than just one man. The leader, the killing of its leader, deals a serious blow to the organization. But I would expect that Hamas fighters that remain in Gaza remain fighting. And then there is the issue of what happens if the war does come to an end. Who governs Gaza? Who pays for its reconstruction? Who looks after and manages its security? And none of those questions have an answer to them. Benjamin Netanyahu has not yet formulated, or if he has formulated, he's certainly not made public, a day-after plan for Gaza. So, yeah, a significant moment today, a major victory for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli government, the Israeli military, the Israeli public. But if we are thinking that this could be a moment, a turning point in the war, I think that might be premature.
Thanks for the analysis, Alistair. Can you also just give us a bit of a picture of who was Yahya Sinwar? You say he was a significant figure. What do we know about him?
Sure. He was born in Khan Yunis, the second largest city in Gaza, in the sort of southern centre of Gaza. He joined Hamas in the late 1980s, just shortly after Hamas was formed during the first Intifada, the uprising, the Palestinian uprising against the Israelis. He spent about 2 decades in an Israeli prison for killing 4 people that he believed were informants for Israel. In prison, he learnt Hebrew. He became a fluent, very proficient speaker of Hebrew to communicate with his jailers, but to also better understand and to get into the heads of his enemy, the Israelis. He was released in 2011, a massive Palestinian prisoner release in exchange for Gilad Shalit, who was an Israeli soldier being held hostage in Gaza. He then went to climb the ranks of Hamas in Gaza. At the time of October the 7th, which he almost certainly masterminded and was one of the major architects of October the 7th, he was the leader of Hamas in Gaza. But then after the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, in Tehran back in July, Sinwar assumed overall control of Hamas. Hamas is an organization that's not just confined to Gaza. That's where it has ruled, but it has elements in Lebanon, in the West Bank, of course, in Turkey, and the political leadership in Doha. So Sinwar became the overall leader of all of that. He became Hamas's point man for the negotiations to broker a ceasefire and a hostage release deal. And so he was Israel's most wanted man. It took them, well, it didn't just take them this year to try and find him. They'd tried to kill him in the past, but over the last 12 and a bit months, they'd repeatedly tried to find him. They felt they got close on a number of occasions, but he always slipped the net. But yesterday, in southern Gaza, in Tal al-Sultan, which is a neighborhood in Rafah, where I was actually in only a few weeks ago, they found him and they eventually killed the man that they'd been hunting for.
You say you were in that neighborhood just a few weeks ago. What kind of area was it?
So this is a neighborhood in sort of western Rafah, sort of between the center of the city and the Mediterranean coast. It was one of the last pockets of major Hamas resistance in the south. There was still fighting going on when we were in there. It was completely flattened. There was barely a house left standing. Those that were still standing were unlivable. They were badly damaged. There was clear evidence of heavy fighting, heavy airstrikes. It is where, as well, 6 hostages had been found murdered about 6 weeks ago in a tunnel beneath there. And it was still the scene of battles between the IDF and Hamas. And so it's like a lot of Gaza now. I've been into Khan Yunis as well, a similar picture. Buildings just completely razed to the ground. And that leads us to the question of who is going to rebuild Gaza, how long will it take to do it, and more pressingly, for the people, the Palestinians in Gaza now, with the onset of winter in a few weeks' time probably, a major humanitarian crisis still going on, millions displaced, and calls for more humanitarian aid to get into Gaza urgently.
You talking there about how he's been Israel's most wanted man for a considerable period of time. They've tried to kill him before, they've only just succeeded. We, of course, heard from Benjamin Netanyahu saying that when they did manage to kill Yahya Sinwar, he was hiding in a dark den. He was killed when he fled in a panic from our soldiers. That's obviously what Benjamin Netanyahu was saying. Do we know very much at all about the operation that succeeded?
We don't know much about the operation, but let me sort of flip what Netanyahu had to say and paint another picture. And the reason I'm doing this is this will be a picture that is seen by Palestinians, the picture that is seen by people in Gaza. Firstly, we shouldn't assume that Hamas are unpopular in Gaza, regardless of the devastation that has been reaped upon Gaza over the past year. Hamas are still quite popular as the resistance against Israelis. There was an assumption that Sinwar was hiding in the tunnels, surrounding himself with some of the living hostages as human shields. Perhaps that has been the case. But go back to 2021, after a short 11-day war between Israel and Hamas, and Yahya Sinwar was pictured sitting on an armchair in the rubble of a building, and it was seen around the Middle East as an image of defiance and really an image of victory, that they had seen off Israel during that war. Well, the images of Sinwar dead, but dead above ground, wearing combat fatigues and not hiding in a bunker underground, many people in Gaza, many people in the wider Middle East will also see that as an image of the Hamas leader and as an image of resistance.
Thank you very much indeed, Alistair. Alistair Bunkle there, reporting for us on this significant day in the Middle East conflict, because, as we've been reporting today, Israel has confirmed that they have killed the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, the top leader of Hamas and one of the chief architects of the October 7 attack. We can bring in now our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, for more on this story. Alex, just how significant a day is this?
I think this, Sophie, is a very significant moment. What exactly it means will take some time to unravel. But if Yahya Sinwar was Israel's Osama bin Laden and October the 7th was their 9/11, this is a very significant scalp. But ultimately, one man does not make up Hamas, and one man did not make up Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda still persists, and so will Hamas. We heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the war will continue. He did not declare total victory, although he said that this was it was a big moment for the country. There are, of course, other conflicts going on which are linked in some ways to Gaza, in other ways not linked, depending on your perspective. If you are Hezbollah, you are firing rockets into northern Israel. You started that process on October the 8th in solidarity with the Gazans. I'm not sure that the Israelis see it that way. I'm not sure that they link the war that they are now in with Hezbollah to Gaza. They, I think, effectively see that as a failure of really resolving what happened after 2006 and UN Resolution 1701, which, as far as they're concerned, hasn't been enforced. So I think it's probably quite likely that they will carry on the momentum that they have to make sure that when the fighting does end here, they don't have a heavily armed militant group, Hezbollah, sponsored, of course, by the Iranians, lapping against their border. They have degraded Hezbollah. They have significantly weakened the group. They have decapitated the leadership, taking, of course, the scalp of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader. But I think there are people in the Israeli government, and Benjamin Netanyahu is one of them, the Prime Minister, who will say there's unfinished business here, and we have things that we want to achieve before negotiations and diplomacy can really start to begin. That said, the killing of Yahya Sinwar is significant because, I mean, as opposed to yesterday, you may not have seen a possible pathway to the end of this crisis. You can now see how that end could come about. It may be that the Americans, after the election is after the way, start putting on a great deal of pressure on Netanyahu, saying, look, what's happening in Gaza is, you know, it's just so terrible now. You've achieved all of the aims that you could have possibly hoped to achieve. Really, now is the time to wrap that up, and that would calm a lot of the tensions within the region. But there are still a lot of things unresolved, a lot of red lines that have been broken, and new red lines that need to be established. I'm thinking, for instance, the fact that in April, the Iranians fired missiles at the Israelis. In October, a similar thing happened. You had a response also from the Israelis as well. So that's something that's broken down. That was the first time you had this direct contact between the two. Is that now a new norm? And what does that mean? How will that play out in the days and weeks to come? Again, we don't know the answer to all of that. And Yahya Sinwar, although it's significant, it is just one man. So it's, you know, it's quite possible that the violence does continue for some time.
Alex, just stay with us because I've got a bit of breaking news for you that I want to get your reaction to coming through from the States, because a spokesperson for President Biden has said that DNA tests have now confirmed that Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar, is dead. The statement says this is a good day for Israel, for the United States and for the world. So that coming in there from the White House, DNA test confirming that Hamas's leader is dead. That statement from Biden. And apparently the president will be speaking soon with Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss bringing the hostages home. That statement there from Joe Biden. Alex, how, I guess, significant do you think that call will be from the United States?
Well, I mean, it's hard to know exactly what will go on in that conversation between the two men. We know that the relationship has been very, very difficult. It's been quite fractious in recent months. They spoke quite recently, but that was the first time they'd spoken since August. And if you know, one of the things that people within the region have looked at is actually how powerless the United States has been in all of this to bring its influence to bear on what is a crucial ally.
Alex, I'm just going to jump in because I'm going to take you to the United States, where Kamala Harris is speaking now. Vice President Kamala Harris.
Say to any terrorist who kills Americans, threatens the American people, or threatens our troops or our interests, know this: we will always bring you to justice. Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated, and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin, without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all. I thank you all.
Is the U.S. asking Israel to end the war now, Madam Vice President?
Well, that short statement there from the Vice President, Kamala Harris. We've, of course, heard from President Joe Biden that he's going to be talking to Benjamin Netanyahu shortly. Alex, just to go back to you and return to what you were saying about the importance of that relationship between the United States and Israel.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite interesting listening to Kamala Harris. The emphasis she was putting on really, it was the beginning of the end. She was talking about how the day after this war, or in the days after it, that there must be a chance for, you know, an equitable end for the Palestinians, and she used that phrase, self-determination. I'm not sure how that's going to be seen amongst Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet. Remember, it's described as the most right-wing in Israel's history. Many of the people around him, including him, say that there won't be a Palestinian state. But that's certainly the track that the Americans, or at least the Democrats, are on. Of course, we don't know who's going to be in the White House after the next election, and I think they will be watching that very closely in Israel. The permutations of what all that mean will have a knock-on effect here for the region. But I suppose, Sophie, the kind of takeaway point, the interesting thing to bear in mind, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, he was slammed in Israel for saying this, but he has said, in his view, that October the 7th, there's never any justification. It was an atrocity. It was terrible. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't happen in isolation. There is a problem that has been unresolved since the creation of Israel in 1948, and that is what to do about the Palestinian question. And that persists even if you can damp down the flames around the region now, if you can stop the violence on the border here in Lebanon, if you can sort out the crisis in Gaza and stop the fighting with Hamas and get the hostages back, if you can even sort of damp down the Iranian question, that question still remains, and that's going to be a thorn in everybody's side in the region, not just Israel's, because the Palestinian question has an awful habit of spilling out across the region into other countries. That remains, so that problem still needs to be sorted out. Now, my guess is that actually what will happen is that the crisis will calm down and it will be managed as it has been for decades. But that ultimately means that it will erupt again, because there are two competing narratives within the region, the Palestinian one and the Israeli one. Neither side sees the justice in either's narrative. So that friction, that possibility to continue conflict, even if you can manage it in the short term, that continues. And that's the fundamental question. But that, of course, is what Kamala Harris was getting at when she was talking about self-determination for the Palestinians. There are many people in the region, of course, who will look at the government, you know, down the coast. It always strikes you when you're standing in Lebanon. It's not very far away geographically, but there are many people in that cabinet in Israel who will not see it that way at all.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Alex Rossi speaking to us there from Beirut. Well, of course, as you would expect, we are getting some political and diplomatic reaction into the news that Israel has killed the leader of Hamas, one of the key architects of the October 7 attack, a man called Yahya Sinwar, and a statement, of course, from President Biden saying that DNA tests confirm that death. Now, we've also had a statement here in the UK from the Defence Secretary, John Healey. Now, in the statement, he says, "I, for one, will not mourn the death of a terror leader like Sinwar, someone who was responsible for the terror attack on October the 7th. And I'm conscious, like the UK government is, that triggered not just the darkest, deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Second World War, but it's triggered since more than a year of conflict and an intolerable level of civilian Palestinian casualties as well." That statement there from John Healey. We've also had a statement in from Israel's president, that's Isaac Herzog. That reads, "Sinwar, the mastermind behind the deadly October 7th attack, has for years been responsible for heinous acts of terrorism against Israeli civilians, citizens of other countries, and the murder of thousands of innocent people. His evil endeavours were dedicated to terror, bloodshed, and destabilising the Middle East. Now more than ever, we must act in every way possible to bring back the 101 hostages who are still being held in horrific conditions by Hamas terrorists in Gaza." Well, of course, we've heard from the US a bit of an optimistic note, you may say, struck by both the President Joe Biden and also the Vice President Kamala Harris about the prospect of some kind of end to the war. But in the last hour, we've also heard from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who I think it's fair to say struck a bit of a different tone. Let's take a listen as to what he had to say.
I am standing here today to announce, to notify you that he has been killed. Yahya Sinwar, he who killed and prepared the worst massacre ever of our people since the Holocaust. He was killed by our heroic soldiers. And today we have finished our accounts with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home, because that is our supreme commitment, my supreme commitment. And to the people of Gaza, I am telling you that Sinwar told you that, in fact, he was reigning and doing so well, but in fact he was hiding in a little dark cave. But now that he has been eliminated, you will see that there will be a decline of the evil and they will no longer reign over Gaza. This is the beginning. This is the day after Hamas now. It is now an opportunity for you to be released and freed of his tyranny. And to you, the Hamas, believe me, the leaders, they can never flee us. They will be eliminated. But for those who are willing to lay down their arms from the Hamas and free the hostages, believe me, they will be saved. But those who do not, their days are numbered if they dare hurt any of the hostages. It is now bringing about the end of the war. And to the people of the region, Gaza, Beirut, and the whole region, the dark is now retreating. The light is coming out. Nasrallah, Akil, and so many of their other comrades, their days are numbered. They are no longer here. It is an opportunity for us to thwart that evil and bring about a positive future, one where we will be able to see how a blessing will be upon us.
Benjamin Netanyahu speaking there, saying evil has suffered a heavy blow, but Israel's task is not complete. Statement released there after Yahya Sinwar's death was confirmed. We can now take a listen to the US Vice President Kamala Harris. She's been speaking in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, in the last few minutes.
Today, Israel confirmed that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, is dead, and justice has been served. And the United States, Israel, and the entire world are better off as a result. Sinwar was responsible for the killing of thousands of innocent people, including the victims of October 7 and hostages killed in Gaza. He had American blood on his hands. Today, I can only hope that the families of the victims of Hamas feel a sense and measure of relief. Sinwar was the mastermind of October 7, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. A terrorist attack that killed 1,200 innocent people and included horrific sexual violence and more than 250 hostages taken into Gaza, including 7 Americans, living and deceased, who remain in captivity. A terrorist attack that triggered a devastating war in Gaza, a war that has led to unconscionable suffering of many innocent Palestinians and greater instability throughout the Middle East. In the past year, American special operations and intelligence personnel have worked closely with their Israeli counterparts to locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leaders. And I commend their work. And I will say, to any terrorist who kills Americans, threatens the American people, or threatens our troops or our interests, know this: we will always bring you to justice. Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all. I thank you all.
Is the U.S. asking? Is the U.S.
Vice President Kamala Harris speaking there in Milwaukee, saying that the killing of Yahya Sinwar gives an opportunity to finally end the war in the Middle East. That is what she said, an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. Will you join us on an evening where Israel has confirmed Hamas's top leader has been killed in a military operation in southern Gaza? Yahya Sinwar was one of the chief architects of the October the 7th attack on Israel last year. He's also been their main target since the conflict began. A warning that we're about to show you an image from the scene of the Israeli military operation in Gaza, which some may find distressing. So the image that you're looking at right now appears to show Israeli soldiers at the scene of the attack. And you can see there, of course, the body of a man believed to be Yahya Sinwar in the rubble. Israel confirming the death of Yahya Sinwar. And of course, we have also heard from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, saying that DNA confirms his death. Now, in the last hour, we've also heard from Benjamin Netanyahu, who said the death of Yahya Sinwar offers a chance of peace in the Middle East, but he did warn the war in Gaza is still not over.
He was killed by our heroic soldiers, and today we have finished our accounts with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home.
I just want to bring you a statement from the White House's Jake Sullivan, because we have been hearing a lot, of course, from Israel this evening, but we've also been hearing an awful lot out of the United States reacting to this as well and trying to push what they hope to happen next. So this statement through from Jake Sullivan of the White House, he says that the US now expects to see progress on the ground on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. He says that they've had constructive communications with Israel on its potential response to Iran. So you can see there the kind of diplomacy in the background. Jake Sullivan there saying that they've been having constructive communications with Israel, but they expect to see progress on the ground on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And really, I think, echoing what we heard from Vice President Kamala Harris earlier, where she says that the death of Yahya Sinwar, one of the chief architects of the October 7th attack on Israel, really does offer, as she says, an opportunity to end the war in Gaza. But of course, it does remain to be seen the all-important response of Benjamin Netanyahu. He says the conflict is not over, and of course highlighting the 101 hostages who still remain in Gaza yet to be returned. And of course, important to say that although this is an extremely significant day for the Middle East, for Israel, for Gaza, and of course for the world, it is just one man. I do want to return now just for a moment to domestic news here in the United Kingdom. But of course, we're going to be keeping you up to speed with all of those developments in the Middle East just as soon as we get them. Any response from the United States, any response from Israel, and of course, any response from Hamas as well, who've yet to confirm the killing. But here, back in the United Kingdom, the cabinet appears to be fractious as it approaches its first budget. Rumours of ministers going over the head of the Chancellor straight to the Prime Minister with complaints of spending cuts to their departments. And now we understand this turbulence led to delays in the Treasury submitting the main parts of its financial plans to the official forecaster. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, reports.
A deadline reached, a deadline missed. Talks on the budget close to stalemate with just 2 weeks to go. A Chancellor at odds with Cabinet colleagues, a Prime Minister brought in to referee, 3 members of the Cabinet raising the alarm with number 10. They say the justice system, the transport network and local government cannot withstand a further squeeze. It could mean a legal system in peril.
Parts of the system are already on the point of collapse. That means trials being delayed to the point where they break down. That means criminals walking free. That means victims not getting justice. And when this breaks down, it is more important than just the individuals involved. It's actually the rule of law. It's the rules which govern our society that keep us safe.
But you are going to have to pay more for that.
Price hikes for trains and buses.
Lots of new companies wanting to run train services like Lumo to Rochdale, for example, competing with the current operators. Well, allowing that sort of private competition was going to be one of the bits of private sector involvement that was going to be allowed alongside Great British Railways. I think they might have to cut back on some of those ideas because they're going to need every penny of income in the rail industry to be able to make the nationalisation affordable.
Hard choices for councils.
They're making difficult decisions. Do they have to reduce home-to-school transport? Are they cutting school crossing patrols? Some councils that are facing closing libraries or reducing support to the most vulnerable. That's the real-life impact of the work that local councils do that too often people don't see.
One government, but 2 opposing views. The Chancellor in the building behind me, like the Prime Minister next door, are aligned. They believe that a bit more pay now will free up more money to spend closer to the next general election. But some Cabinet Ministers are dragging their feet over this budget because they believe that the pain now is just too much to bear. We find out who's right in a fortnight. This is the image the government wants to project. A Chancellor in total control. Behind the scenes, it's being tested. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, is the Chancellor facing a revolt from the Cabinet when the budget is published in just 13 days' time? Earlier, I spoke to the former Chief of Staff to the ex-Chancellor George Osborne, Rupert Harrison. Now, he believes Labour's backed itself into a corner ahead of the budget with its manifesto promises. Thanks very much for being on the programme. Good to have you here. What are you expecting to see in the budget?
Well, I think the main thing we're going to see in the budget is significant tax rises to fund significant increase in public spending. And that's a very difficult situation that Rachel Reeves has got herself into ahead of the budget because all of the Labour Party's political ambitions require that big increase in public spending. But of course, they spent the election campaign effectively ruling out the main tax rises. So that is the conundrum that she has created for herself as we head into the budget.
So they've effectively kind of closed off some of the avenues that they could use.
Exactly, and that is actually not something that previous chancellors coming into government have always done. So if you look at Gordon Brown in '97 and George Osborne in 2010, they were both quite careful always to not get pinned down on the big tax rises. The standard answer was always, no chancellor will ever tie their hands, got to have flexibility, I don't want to raise tax, but, and all of that. Whereas Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves were very, very explicit in the election campaign. They would not increase income tax.
Well, they had to, didn't they, really? Because, the Conservatives were fighting a campaign on a tax bombshell.
They were put under pressure, but they didn't have to rule it out. And I think that's created quite a difficult situation. I think they came in thinking that they would find a lot of other tax rises that they could use to raise the revenues. But the problem is I think they came in with some very optimistic assumptions about what some of those taxes would raise, particularly taxes on mobile international capital and individuals like capital gains tax and non-DOMs. And I think some of those numbers have been knocked down very significantly by the OBR.
You mentioned there that they need to increase taxes to effectively increase public spending. And of course, part of the reason that Labour feel they need to do that is because of the savage cuts that were pencilled in by the previous government. Even if they do increase spending in some areas, there's going to be a squeeze, right? You, of course, were George Osborne's right-hand man during the austerity years. Do you think we're going to see austerity under this government?
Well, the question is how you define austerity. Rachel Reeves has now said no austerity.
Yeah, but
what does that mean?
You're Mr. Austerity, aren't you, in a way? So in your definition, do you think we're going to see austerity?
Well, I mean, austerity was really a strategy to deal with a huge budget deficit. So this Labour government talk about their inheritance, but actually, if you go back to 2010, we had a budget deficit of more than 10% of GDP. So it was a requirement by a coalition government, not just Conservatives, also Liberal Democrats, to reduce spending over time in order to bring the deficit down. If you actually look at Jeremy Hunt's plans in this election, he did actually have spending increasing in real terms. But of course, bigger increases in some departments, like the NHS, would still have meant tough settlements in other departments. But that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, but just to pin you down, with your own definition, would you define it as austerity that we're going to see?
So I think that Rachel Reeves has allowed other people to define it. And interestingly, the Institute for Fiscal Studies have now come out and said that really to be able to claim no austerity, you've basically got to have no government department seeing real terms cuts in its budget. Now, that is asking quite a lot, because you could have overall increases in departmental spending being quite significant, but if you were channeling those towards your priorities, whether that's the NHS or defence, it's likely that one or two departments are going to take some of the slack by having cuts. If you're allowing other people to define no austerity, which is I think what's happened, as no cuts in government departments, that's where you get into numbers like 20, 25 billion pounds of tax rises needed.
You, of course, were in the engine room for lots of budgets, so you know what's going to be going on behind the scenes right now. What do you think is going to be happening? We're getting all these reports of worried secretaries of state lobbying the Treasury. What do you think will be happening behind the scenes?
I mean, some of this is absolutely standard. So having secretaries of state writing to the Prime Minister saying the cuts that are being asked of us are outlandish, that happens every time. I think there's an added frisson this time, because I think a lot of these are Labour secretaries of state who expected to get into government and find that they had a chancellor that was kind of giving them largesse to spend, and they're a little bit shocked that actually they still have to do the day-to-day business of government, which is discipline with taxpayers' money. That's what people expect. What they're doing in the Treasury, by now they'll have a pretty good idea of what the numbers are, what the main measures are, that you can't do these kind of last-minute essay crisis budgets anymore, because the Office of Budget Responsibility requires those major measures to be in at least a week before. So basically this week it'll be wrapped up. I think that the great advantage Rachel Reeves has is that the Treasury will always have a back pocket, right? So the officials will have known for months that, okay, there'll be a new Labour government, they're going to need money, they've ruled out all these big tax rises, we better give them some other options. So I think that Rachel Reeves will have some, I don't think it necessarily is to her disadvantage for people to be saying, where is she going to find the money? Because the Treasury always has some surprises, whether it's tackling tax avoidance.
That old chestnut comes up every
year. The fact is that actually there is a rolling programme, and the Treasury is constantly kind of clamping down on new things, and the evidence is that it does raise money. So there will be a back pocket that the Treasury will be helping her with. But I think in the end, she is going to have to break one of her election pledges, and I think it sounds like employer national insurance is going to be the one. If I were her and I needed to raise significant tax revenue, I would go all in on that, because I think the experience shows it's much easier to defend one big tax rise than to have a long series of fiddly tax rises that could unravel, each of which could cause a big political row. Have your one big row, say it's for public services, and take on the argument. And unfortunately, because of what they said in the election campaign, that will come at a price of people saying they broke their pledge.
You, of course, tried to get into Parliament at the election. You ran to be a Conservative MP and you didn't make it. Who do you think has a better chance of turning your party around, Cami Badenoch or Robert Jenrick?
Well, I've put my name to a letter that is going to come out supporting Cami Badenoch. I actually think they're both good candidates. I think all four of the final candidates were good. I don't know either of them particularly well. From what I've seen, I think they'd both be good candidates. But yes, on balance, I'm going to be supporting Cami.
We, of course, saw the comments by Christopher Chope saying she was too preoccupied with her children to be an effective leader of the opposition.
I mean, those are ridiculous and outdated and offensive comments.
I mean, you worked with George Osborne and David Cameron when they had young children as well.
David Cameron had a baby while he was in Downing Street. I mean, it's just absurd. It's sexist, it's old-fashioned, and frankly, these are the kinds of things that really damage the Conservative Party's reputation. We need to move on from these kinds of outdated views.
OK, thank you very much indeed. My interview there with Rupert Harrison, and of course there's going to be another week of lots of speculation about what will be in the budget, the moment when we really will find out the true colour of this Labour administration. I want to return to our top story now, though, because Israel has confirmed that Hamas's top leader has been killed in a military operation in southern Gaza. Yahya Sinwar was one of the chief architects of the October the 7th attack on Israel last year. He's also been their main target ever since the conflict began, so a very significant moment in the war in the Middle East. A warning that we are about to show an image from the scene of the Israeli military operation in Gaza, which some may find distressing. But the image that you are looking at now appears to show Israeli soldiers at the scene of the attack with the body of a man who is believed to be Yahya Sinwar in the rubble. So Israel confirming that that man is Yahya Sinwar. We've also heard from President Biden of the US saying that DNA tests confirm that he has been killed. Now, this evening, we've heard from Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who said that the death of Yahya Sinwar offers a chance of peace in the Middle East. But he did warn the war in Gaza is still not over.
He was killed by our heroic soldiers, and today we have finished our account with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home.
A statement there from Benjamin Netanyahu saying the war is not over, that they will continue until all the hostages are brought home. We've also heard from the United States this evening. President Biden released a statement a short time ago. It reads, "To my Israeli friends, this is no doubt a day of relief and reminiscence similar to the scenes witnessed throughout the United States after President Obama ordered the raid to kill Osama bin Laden in 2011. Israel has had every right to eliminate the leadership and military structure of Hamas. Hamas is no longer capable of carrying out another October 7th. That statement there by the US President Joe Biden. We can speak now to Laura Blumenfeld, who's a former senior advisor to the US State Department's Israel-Palestinian negotiating team. Thank you so much for being on the programme this evening. How significant is this killing?
It's significant. I think what President Biden is saying, take the win. And this time there's more of an opportunity for Netanyahu to take it because this was an offensive win, unlike in April where the president said to Netanyahu, take the win when they successfully defended themselves against an Iranian assault. Ever since October 7th, Netanyahu, look, it's been very political for him, but it's also very personal. He released Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's leader, in a prisoner exchange for a kidnapped Israeli soldier over a decade ago. And I think he felt personally that he'd been sucker punched. So today we saw the counter punch. And, you know, when the score is even, Netanyahu is going full eye for an eye. There's a chance that we might be even.
Do you see any, I guess, discrepancy between what's coming out of the United States, where Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are saying, look, this is an opportunity to end the war, and then Benjamin Netanyahu is saying the task before us is not yet complete?
Well, I think they are working kind of hand in hand. I mean, the other significant event that happened today was B-2 bombers from the United States bombed 5 underground weapons facilities by the Houthis in Yemen. And that was a not too subtle message to Iran to say, this is what we're capable of. And if this escalates, it's not going to go your way. So, you know, there has been some tension. I often think it's sort of like in real estate, it's location, location. The Israelis are an 11-minute golf cart ride away from the tunnels of Gaza. And the United States here, sitting here in Washington, we're an 11-hour flight from Kabul. So I do think that, you know, there aren't always the same exact approach, but I think there is agreement on the problem. And the problem is a, you know, radical, hostile Iran that is bent on destroying Israel. It isn't a matter of borders. It's a matter of elimination of the state.
There's been a bit more frustration than that, though, hasn't there? You seem to just say, oh, it's just a small kind of difference of opinion because of geography. I mean, it feels to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels to me that there's been a deep frustration from the United States about many of Israel's actions.
Well, I agree with you. The United States and Israel might agree on the goal, but from the very beginning, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said, how you fight this matters, how you do this matters. And it's an issue of morality for the United States and human rights, which is important. The Israelis say we don't have the luxury for that. And that goes back for decades. I mean, you think of Prime Minister Golda Meir in the 70s when she said, look, I'd rather have a bad headline than a good eulogy. So I guess it's sort of an existential struggle for Israelis. And, they say that you can't always make nice in this really tough neighborhood. And yes, that has been a source of tension between the United States and Israel.
Do you think that we might look at this moment and think, this was the beginning of the end of the war? Or is that a bit naive, given, like you say, the kind of existential struggle that Israel feels it's in now?
Right. I'd like to hope so. I mean, Netanyahu said today is the beginning of the day after, and wow, wouldn't we all like to believe that? The problem is there still is an account open with Iran. Israelis are, bracing for the counterstrike that will come after they launch their strike, which is expected. 200 ballistic missiles were launched at Israel on October 1st, and so there are accounts open. I do think once, though, that this is over, this is a kind of very kinetic month. We're in October. Today was, you could call an October surprise. There's an opportunity to de-escalate, but I don't see that. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, was quoting the book of Leviticus, saying our enemies will fall by the sword. So they still feel like they have capabilities in Hezbollah that they have to deal with. Hamas is degraded but not defeated. Rockets are still flying over Tel Aviv. So we're not there yet, but with some creative diplomacy, there's an opportunity now to get closer, especially if the hostages are released. It's just the most important linchpin, and that's why America's been so focused on it.
Do you see any glimmer of hope when it comes to the release of the hostages?
Well, I think it's interesting. If you listen to the hostage families, they'll say themselves, the death of Sinwar means nothing to us, and the lives of the hostages mean everything. So Netanyahu was calling directly on the Palestinians of Gaza, saying, lay down your arms, release the hostages, and you will go free. You will have free passage out of Gaza if you want. You will not be held, responsible. You will not die. I mean, because right now they're up against, Israel's formidable military machine. In the last Zagami public opinion poll in Gaza, Hamas had a 7% approval rating. So, I don't think Netanyahu is the right face for the public diplomacy to be saying to Iran, which he has been to Iranians, overthrow the grand ayatollahs of who are oppressing you, or frankly, in Lebanon, they're calling on the Lebanese to overthrow Hezbollah. And now he's turning to Gaza. It's kind of an odd messenger, but it's a reasonable message.
Can I ask you about the US election, which is fast approaching? That we obviously don't know the result of that. Things are very, very close. It looks genuinely too close to call. But we could have two very different presidents taking over from November. What kind of impact do you think that could have on the situation in the Middle East?
It's a great question, because in some sense, although Harris and Trump couldn't be more different, they do agree on one thing, which is that they don't want this war to continue on their watch. Trump says, quote, I'm quoting him, get your victory and quit the killing. And Harris has said many times just, about the sort of unconscionable killing of civilians in Gaza, and now moving on toward to Lebanon. So I think both of them are interested in this being over before they take over. And I think that's why what you're seeing is a kind of escalation by Israel in this kind of free-for-all period. In basketball terms, you might call it buzzer beater shots. Just before game over, you kind of throw your longest baskets. And the best, most optimistic, I guess, view would be that's what Netanyahu is doing. He's trying to just kind of even the score, call it a win, and then go back to what Israel's actually better at, which is building rather than blowing up. It's just a travesty what's happened over the last year.
Yeah, it is. Like you say, it's just been the amount of death. It's just the most awful thing to be witnessing, even though we're so far away from it. It's just absolutely devastating. Can you sorry.
No, I was just going to say that, look, Sinwar was the playwright. He wrote this script. He called it the Al-Aqsa flood. And he called it a flood because he wanted all the proxies of Iran to join in and join this fight. So the playwright is now dead. Does that mean the curtain drops on the stage and everybody can kind of go back to their lives? I mean, that is the hope. And that is what Netanyahu is aiming for, to see if he can take advantage of the kind of chaos now that's certainly, carrying out in Gaza among the Hamas leadership and bring this horrible chapter to an end.
You call Yahya Sinwar there the playwright, which is a very kind of evocative phrase. Can you just explain his significance?
Well, yeah, look, he wrote the script, and it's kind of a horrible thing to say, but he spent his years, he was jailed, I believe it was in 1982, and he spent, or maybe it was 92, I don't want to misspeak, but he spent 20 years in Israeli prison, and he used to say that he understood Israeli psychology, the language, even better than many Israelis, and he exploited Israelis' weaknesses, including the fact that they will go to the ends of the earth to liberate hostages. That's one of their core values, because it's a small society and there's this kind of emphasis on every person is responsible for his brother or sister. So he understood the value of hostage taking, and he's exploited that. That's why when people ask, who will replace Sinwar as head of Hamas, there are many willing replacements, but I'm not sure there's somebody who has the kind of emotional evil genius that Sinwar had. That'll be really hard to replace.
Thank you very much. It's been fascinating talking to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as we've been discussing tonight, some big news coming out of Gaza, because Israel saying that they have killed the leader of Hamas, who we've just been described to us as the playwrights of that terrorism towards Israel, confirmed by the US. That statement from President Biden saying DNA tests confirm Yahya Sinwar has been killed, one of the chief architects of the October 7th attacks. But the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said the US will redouble its efforts with partners to end the conflict in Gaza following the death of Yahya Sinwar. We can cross now to our US correspondent Mark Stone, who is with us tonight. Mark, how significant is this moment?
A hugely significant moment, as you've been discussing. There's no question about that, and it is echoed by the statement, a very lengthy statement from President Joe Biden, where he details some of what we know about how and where he was killed, and he details what he did, that he was the mastermind of the October the 7th massacres, says Biden, rapes, kidnappings. It was on his orders that Hamas terrorists invaded Israel to intentionally and with unspeakable savagery kill and massacre civilians, a Holocaust survivors, children in front of their parents, and parents in front of their children. So this is a deeply significant moment for sure. But of course, it raises questions about what next. I think through the course of this past year, Sophie, it has been the case that many have hoped, have believed that when Sinwar was finally captured or killed, that would create a punctuation point in this conflict, perhaps a full stop. Perhaps it would, for Israel, provide a closure for them to stop what is happening in Gaza and to move on, to withdraw from Gaza, to feel like it is for them, for Israel, mission accomplished. I think that question remains open because clearly in the north of Gaza, Hamas is still a significant fighting force, proving that it can still strike against Israel. And so even with Sinwar gone, as always with organizations like Hamas, you remove the leader, you cut the head off the snake, and other heads grow. And I think that may well be the case again with this one. I should say that we are awaiting a news conference from the Pentagon in Washington. What will that bring us? What more will that tell us? I don't know. My sense is that they will simply confirm that this was an Israeli operation, but clearly it will have involved American weapons. It may well have involved American intelligence as well. So we'll await to see what the Pentagon says. But certainly from the White House and indeed from the State Department, from Biden, from Blinken, this is a significant day, an achievement to have killed Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th attacks.
Such a significant moment, as you were saying, Mark. We've just heard from Reuters via the State Department that the US is going to try and push a Gaza ceasefire proposal forward. So that coming from the State Department in the US, saying that the US is going to try and push a Gaza ceasefire proposal forward. It is pretty clear, isn't it, that America is trying to use this killing as a way to de-escalate.
Yeah, a full stop, as I described it. That's what they will be hoping. That's it, done, mission accomplished. But it isn't, I don't think. And as we've seen with the Americans, they have been unable to deal with or to persuade their ally in Israel to move on from this war now. And of course, the bigger challenge from an Israeli perspective is Iran. We're still awaiting what that Israeli retaliation against Iran, which it sees as the head of all this, the true head of the snake, how they deal with Iran.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there for us, reporting from Detroit. Well, significant news this evening. Israel and the US confirming that the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, one of the key architects of the October 7 attacks, has been killed. Many people, of course, across the world will be hoping that this marks a full stop on the conflict. But, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu saying Israel's task is not complete, although evil has suffered a heavy blow. We're expecting to hear from the Pentagon imminently in Washington. We will bring you what the Pentagon have to say just as soon as it happens.
Well, good evening. It is 8 o'clock. You're watching Sky News. You can see live scenes here from Washington, where it's currently 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're currently waiting for a briefing from the Pentagon following the confirmation earlier this evening from Israel that it has killed the Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar. Now, Sinwar was one of the chief architects, it's understood, of the October 7th attack on Israel last year and has been their top target since this conflict began. Let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who is, like us, waiting for this briefing to start at the Pentagon. And what have we heard from Washington so far since this news broke earlier today, Mark?
Well, let me give you the latest that we have had from Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, who said in the last few minutes that they will redouble, the US will now redouble its efforts with partners to end this conflict. I think there is a hope that the news today that Yahya Sinwar has been eliminated, as the IDF is putting it, will provide some closure, some sense of mission accomplished in terms of Israel's operations in Gaza that have gone on for a year now, that are the direct consequence of what happened on October the 7th, those attacks led by Yahya Sinwar, attacks that were as spectacular for Hamas as they were bloody for Israel, attacks that prompted the year-long war now in Gaza and the deaths of so many civilians. For so long, the Americans have been trying to find an end to this, trying to find a way of bringing it to an end. I think the hope will be that the death of Yahya Sinwar will provide the beginning of that end. But I think, you know, as we know with groups like Hamas, when you kill the leader, when you cut off the head of the snake, other heads simply grow. And I think that will be the case probably with Hamas. And it's certainly clear that in the north of Gaza, Hamas is still a fighting force. And it is also true to say, frankly, that over the course of the past year, the way that the conflict in Gaza has unfolded will only have emboldened support for Hamas among the population, or at least a proportion of the population within Gaza. So that is the challenge for Israel. That is the challenge for the United States. In terms of this briefing, well, it is the regular Pentagon briefing that we're going to hear today. But we are hoping, of course, given the significance of what's happened in Gaza with the death of Yahya Sinwar, that there may be some more detail. Honestly, I doubt whether we'll get a great deal. I think the Pentagon will probably tell us that this is an Israeli operation, but they may give us some detail on American weapons that were used, more detail on how the killing happened, and maybe some questions I'm sure will be asked about whether US intelligence helped to lead to this moment. I guess the other question is what does it mean for the hostages? So many hostages still being held in Gaza. It is not clear how many of them are still alive. There was a suggestion, certainly the Israelis were suggesting, that Yahya Sinwar was hiding in a tunnel in southern Gaza and that he was surrounded by hostages, using them as shields to prevent him from being harmed. If that is the case, then it raises questions about whether any hostages were killed in this operation. If that is not the case, then where was Yahya Sinwar? What was he doing at the time that he was killed? What does his death mean about for the process, the negotiation process of getting the hostages out? The Qataris were speaking just yesterday, a key part in the puzzle, in the negotiation to get the hostages out. They were saying that in the past few weeks there has been absolutely no negotiations ongoing at all. None of the sides involved have been at the table. So the negotiations are at a dead end right now. The hope from President Biden, who's released a lengthy statement, and from his team, is that the death of Sinwar
Mark, I'm just going to interrupt you because that
Let's
Pentagon briefing is about to start. This is Major General Patrick Ryder.
As you are aware, Israel confirmed today the death of the leader of the Hamas terrorist group, Yahya Sinwar. We'd refer you to the Israelis to discuss the details, but this is clearly a significant development and a major counterterrorism achievement. As you saw from our readout earlier today, Secretary Austin spoke earlier today with Israeli Minister of Defense Gallant to discuss the reports on the killing of Sinwar and to get an update. I would highlight that when the call occurred, the IDF was still working to confirm Sinwar's death. During the call, Secretary Austin also reaffirmed U.S. support for Israel's right to defend itself and reiterated that the deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Battery represents the United States' unwavering, enduring, and ironclad commitment to Israel's security. The Secretary also expressed strong support for the immediate release of all remaining hostages and a ceasefire in Gaza. We'll have much more to say from the Department on the death of Sinwar very soon, and we'll keep you updated. Separately, as we announced last evening, U.S. military forces, including U.S. Air Force B-2 bombers, conducted precision strikes against 5 hardened underground weapons storage locations in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. U.S. forces targeted several of the Houthis' underground facilities, housing various weapons components of the types the Houthis have used to target civilian and military vessels throughout the region. U.S. Central Command is still conducting a post-strike assessment, so I don't have any details to provide on that front, other than to say that we struck exactly what we intended to hit. We'll provide updates as appropriate. As Secretary Austin highlighted in his statement last night, the employment of the B-2 bomber was a unique demonstration of the United States' ability to target facilities that our adversaries seek to keep out of reach, no matter how deeply buried underground, hardened, or fortified. And it demonstrates U.S. global strike capabilities to take action against these targets when necessary, anytime, anywhere. It also sends a clear message to the Houthis that there will continue to be consequences for their illegal and reckless attacks, which put innocent civilian lives and U.S. and partner forces' lives at risk. Shifting gears, Secretary Austin arrived yesterday in Brussels and today participated in a de-ISIS ministerial, the first session of the NATO Defense Ministerial, and a productive meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. In his opening remarks at the de-ISIS ministerial, Secretary Austin highlighted the work over the last decade of the global coalition to defeat ISIS. And I quote, "For 10 years, this coalition has tackled the scourge of ISIS. Our success stems from our resolve, our commitment to working together, and our willingness to adapt. These core elements will remain at the heart of the next phase of our mission," end quote. Tomorrow, Secretary Austin will participate in the second session of the NATO Defense Ministerial and engage with his NATO counterparts to discuss strengthening the collective security of the alliance and international support to Ukraine's defense. We'll continue to provide readouts and updates on the Secretary's engagements throughout his travels. And finally, the Department of Defense continues to be fully engaged with FEMA and the whole of government relief efforts related to Hurricanes Helene and Milton, and will continue to work with our federal, state, and local partners to ensure we're supporting and coordinating response efforts in support of our fellow Americans. As of earlier today, the National Guard had more than 4,200 guardsmen, nearly 600 high water vehicles, helicopters, and more than a dozen watercraft from 7 states mobilized for the response and recovery mission following Hurricane Milton. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has approximately 450 people supporting with temporary roof support, infrastructure assessment, debris control, flood response, and more. Meanwhile, the department's support for the U.S. government's combined response for Hurricane Helene continues as well. The National Guard has roughly 2,500 guardsmen, 65 high water vehicles, and 11 helicopters, from 13 states mobilized. Approximately 1,400 active duty soldiers are mobilized as well, working with federal, state, and local partners on coordinated response efforts. Active duty forces have been engaged in road clearing, commodity distribution, and access to isolated personnel. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has more than 500 personnel engaged in 33 missions across the region, supporting debris control, temporary power, infrastructure assessment, flood control, and safe waterways assessments. Secretary Austin continues to receive updates on these response efforts, and the department continues to be engaged with interagency partners in support of FEMA, the White House, state, and local governments. The Secretary and his team are also focused on DoD personnel and their families who may be impacted by the hurricanes. With that, I'd be glad to take your questions. We'll start with Associated Press. Tara.
Thanks, General Ryder. Does Secretary Austin have plans to talk with Minister Gallant again later today, now that the death has been confirmed? And does the building assess that this death creates a greater opportunity for a ceasefire? Will you see Secretary Austin press that further with his counterpart?
So I don't have a call to announce now. As I'm sure you can imagine, I'm sure Secretary Austin will speak with Minister Gallant at the earliest opportunity. And again, we'll read that out when it happens. In terms of the opportunities that this presents, I would highlight the President's statement where he highlighted the fact that there is now an opportunity for a day after in Gaza without Hamas in power. And so it does present an opportunity here for a ceasefire. It presents an opportunity for the release of all the remaining hostages. And of course, we'll continue to work toward that end.
Okay, and then secondly, on the B-2 use last night, is there another aircraft that could have carried the munitions that the B-2 delivered? And if so, why use the B-2 instead of something that was closer to the region?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. First of all, in the U.S. military, we have, as you know, we have a wide range of aviation capability that can carry a wide assortment of munitions. The B-2 in particular, though, has a large payload, the ability to operate around the world. As I highlighted in the topper, we can strike anywhere, anytime. And in this particular strike, using its unique capability and ability to carry a large payload, to deliver munitions that could penetrate and strike these deep underground facilities that were storing components that the Houthis have been using. Again, it also sends a very clear message that we can strike targets of this nature anytime, anywhere from around the world. Thank you, Jennifer.
General Ryder, when was the last time the U.S. had a read on where Sinwar was, and do you still have troops helping with intel sharing on the ground in Israel?
Yeah, so I, as I'm sure you can appreciate, not going to be able to discuss specific intelligence. As you highlight and as the President's statement highlighted, we have had special operations forces and intelligence personnel supporting Israel's hostage recovery efforts, advising on their hostage recovery efforts since shortly after October 7. And so in that regard, by providing them this information, the Israelis have been able to go after and look for hostages, as well as find those who have been holding them hostage, to include Sinwar.
And in terms of the B-2 strike, had you struck these targets before with other aircraft and munitions and had to go back and use the B-2, or is this a repeat strike?
To my knowledge, this was not a repeat strike. Again, this was to go after very specific capabilities that the Houthis were storing deep underground.
Was it a response to the 23 missiles that were fired on September 27th at the U.S. destroyers?
This was a response to the continued illegal and reckless action that we see by the Houthis. As you know, this is not the first time that we've struck, but certainly these were unique targets in the sense that they were deep underground targets. Oren.
One question on Israel, one on the B-2s. Did the Special Operations Cell provide any information or intelligence that was used as part of the operations around the killing of Yahya Sinwar?
So my understanding, Oren, is that, the short answer is no, this was an Israeli operation. U.S. forces were not directly involved. Again, as we've highlighted, we've had a small number of special operations forces that have been advising the Israelis on hostage recovery efforts. And again, as the President's statement highlighted, that included working side by side with their Israeli counterparts to help locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leaders hiding in Gaza who've been holding people, to include Americans, hostage since October 7 last year.
Can you say whether information or intelligence generated by the Special Operations Cell there went into previous killings of Hamas leaders like Mohammed Deif or Issa or others?
Again, I'm not going to speak about intelligence other than to say, just highlight what I just told you in terms of sharing intelligence and information in support of hostage recovery efforts and tracking those who have been holding individuals, to include Americans, hostage.
And then just a very quick question on the B-2s. When the Secretary put out a statement last night saying adversaries seeking to essentially place things deep underground in hardened bunkers, you haven't used the word Iran, but that seems a very clear message to Iran and its underground nuclear facilities.
Well, as I highlighted in my topper, it was certainly a message to the Houthis and anyone else, potential adversaries that hide things deep underground. It's a message to them as well. Tony.
One of the unique capabilities is that the B-2 can carry the massive ordnance penetrator, the 30,000-pound bomb that can go deep, deep, deep. Was that used in the first time here?
Yeah, Tony, so for operation security reasons, I'm just not going to be able to get into the type of ordnance that was employed in this mission. Again, the B-2 is a very versatile aircraft that can carry a wide range of munitions tailored for the particular operation that it's been tasked to do. And I'll just leave it there.
Okay, and THAAD, has the THAAD battery arrived, and is it now fully integrated with Israel's air defense systems?
So you saw our statement earlier in the week that troops have begun to arrive in Israel and the components have begun to arrive in Israel. It's going to be fully operations capable in the near future. I'm not going to get into the specific dates for operation security. I will say that it has been integrated into the Israeli air defense as well as our broader U.S. Efforts, regionally to support the defense of Israel.
Few Navy destroyers, possibly, or SWAT?
Major General Patrick Ryder there, the press officer for the Pentagon, giving that briefing there. It is a general briefing, so a number of other topics were being discussed and information being given to the media assembled there, including a response to the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, killed in Gaza, Israel confirming earlier on this evening. He said it was clearly a significant development. Let's bring in our international correspondent, Alex Rossi. Alex, as I said, this is a general, regular, scheduled Pentagon briefing, so they didn't go into too much detail about this specific event, the killing of the Hamas leader. But what did we learn from that briefing?
Good evening from Beirut. Well, we learnt, of course, that this was an Israeli operation. We also learnt as well that as far as the American view of this is concerned, and we heard from the press spokesman there, echoing the comments made by President Biden, that this was possibly a moment that the Israelis may be able to move, or that's certainly the wish of the Americans, towards some form of closure. President Biden, of course, compared what's happened with Yahya Sinwar to the Americans, the feelings that they had when they got Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad in Pakistan. So you can see the parallels there. But the question, of course, is there a disconnect between what the Americans are saying and what the Israelis are saying? It should be said as well, we heard from Vice President Kamala Harris, who was also talking about how this may be the moment that you can move towards peace and self-determination, etc., etc. Striking, I think, a very different chord to what we heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He would also, to sort of paraphrase, recognised this as a significant moment, a triumph over evil, but he did not declare total victory. He made the point that as far as the Israelis are concerned, the war is not over. There are still things that have to be done. Now, of course, it's not lost on anybody that there are conflicts raging around the region. The region is effectively in flames. The big concern is that those flames will get higher and this war will spread and become more and more profound. The war in Gaza, of course, the ceasefire we know is virtually moribund. The question, of course, is will the death of Yahya Sinwar usher in new momentum behind ceasefire negotiations, or will, in fact, it actually make it more difficult? Is Hamas now entirely atomized within Gaza, guerrilla cells fighting the Israelis and nobody really to negotiate with? Who knows within Hamas even where the hostages are being held? Does it make it easier for that ceasefire to come about, or much more difficult? Do the Israelis want a ceasefire, or are they going to continue to prosecute a war and secure what Prime Minister Netanyahu has called total victory? Then, of course, there's the theatre here in Lebanon. The war here is becoming, or has become, more intense by the day. Very powerful clashes between the Israeli military and Hezbollah on the border. Airstrikes now from the Israelis, the length and breadth of the country. Again, it may very well be, although Hezbollah has linked the fight here to what's going on in Gaza, and if there's a ceasefire, it has indicated it would stop. I don't think the Israelis see it that way. They're not going to want to go back to the status quo of October the 6th, where you have a very powerful militant group armed to the teeth on the doorstep that could infiltrate and continue to fire rockets in Gaza. So they may want to, and I think that was pretty some of the sense Netanyahu was saying, degrade Hezbollah further. They've already made significant strides when it comes to that. The pager operation, the operation with walkie-talkies, and of course the decapitation of Hezbollah when it comes to its leadership, not least of all the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. There are also the unanswered questions about Iran as well. What will Israel do? It is still vowing to retaliate for that ballistic missile attack that was launched by the Iranians on October the 1st. That could be a touch paper as well. The Iranians say there's no red lines when it comes to their response. So you could see another cycle of escalation there. But I think, Sarah Jane, overall, that the hope is that the killing of Yahya Sinwar may be, just maybe, and there are lots of caveats to all this, may be the beginning of the end. And what you couldn't see yesterday was perhaps a way to get to the end of this crisis. You can start to see that now. But that doesn't mean, of course, that we're not in for a very violent few weeks or months. This war is not over yet.
Alex, thank you. Alex Rossi there with the latest for us from Beirut. To the day's other big news now, and the family of former One Direction star Liam Payne say they are heartbroken following his death at the age of just 31. The singer was found dead last night after a fall from a third-floor balcony at a hotel in Buenos Aires, Argentina. His family today say they will remember him for his kind, funny and brave soul. An investigation is now underway into the circumstances surrounding his death. Tonight, the authorities said a series of substances were seized from his hotel room, which indicated alcohol and drug consumption. Sky's US correspondent Martha Kellner has the latest.
Forensic teams search for clues. Liam Payne had left many. He plummeted to his death from this third-floor balcony. His behaviour had earlier been concerning hotel staff. Listen to their 911 emergency call.
Hola, buenos días. Recién llamé que se me acordó. Llamo del Hotel Casa Sur Palermo, Costa Rica 6032.
¿Qué sucede en el lugar, señor?
Bueno, tenemos un huésped que está sobrepasado de droga y alcohol y cuando está consciente está rompiendo toda la habitación y bueno, necesitamos que manden a alguien, por favor.
Bajo efectos de alcohol y estupefaciente, ¿no, señor?
Sí, correcto.
They agree police need to attend. Fans lit candles on the street outside. The grief thousands of miles away in the UK was even more acute. The star's family releasing this statement. Liam will live forever in our hearts, they said. We'll remember him for his kind, funny and brave soul. We are supporting each other the best we can as a family and ask for privacy and space at this awful time. Payne had been in Argentina for a One Direction bandmates concert. He'd spent time with his girlfriend.
Morning, everybody. Here's a little video of me. It's rude to put hats on a table.
Sorry.
Is this your hat?
Yeah.
Children. It's a lovely day here in Argentina. We're enjoying ourselves here at our lovely friend Gon's house. Shout out Gon, wherever Gon is.
Shout out Gon.
Shout out Gon, big bad Gon. Yeah, so it's going to be a nice day.
That promise turned to this. At night, Liam Payne's body taken to a mortuary. An autopsy set to confirm the cause of death. Fans grieved to the lyrics of One Direction.
We can live forever.
We can live forever, they sang. But this is where it ended for their idol.
We could be the greatest thing that the world has never seen.
A pop star adored across the globe. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Buenos Aires.
Well, Liam Payne spoke openly about his mental health struggles in the years before his death. The singer described his battle with alcoholism at the peak of his success with One Direction and admitted his addiction continued during the pandemic. In 2019, he spoke in a Sky documentary about life in the public eye, along with the loneliness he felt. Our correspondent Ashna Huranag has this report.
From a working-class family in Wolverhampton to superstardom on a global scale. And it all began here, at just 14 years old, auditioning on The X Factor.
Fly me to the moon.
Millions watched as the son of a factory worker and a nurse then came back 2 years later. And became 1/5 of the biggest and most beloved boy band of the era.
You're insecure.
One Direction were the world's first internet band, their success driven by a fandom that operated so intensely on social media. With 70 million record sales, almost 200 awards and a generation of fans, Payne soon became a father with then-partner Cheryl.
You actually sit and think about it, we've done some amazing things. But to be honest with you, I'm still trying to live a normal life.
Heady success that made their lives anything but normal, and it was difficult to maintain after the band split in 2016.
I've been taking some time and
A songwriter on many of the band's hits, it was no surprise Payne's debut solo venture racked up 1 billion streams. But it was a fleeting triumph as the life of celebrity and fame began to bite. He went on to spend time in rehab for drug and alcohol addiction.
When we were in the band, the best way to secure us, because of how big it got, was just lock us in our rooms. And of course, what's in the room? Minibar. So at a certain point, I thought, well, I'm going to have a party for one. And that just seemed to carry on throughout many years of my life.
The spotlight, often too harsh to bear.
Level of loneliness and
people getting into you every day, like I say, just every so often you're like, when will they send? You know, and then so, like, that's almost nearly killed me a couple of times.
Unimaginable for those that knew the little boy from Wolverhampton with big dreams.
I couldn't believe it. I actually thought I'd got messages coming through from friends saying, you know, please tell me it's not true.
Jodie Richards watched his love of sports morph into a love of performing. They stayed friends all these years, chatting often, and spoke only days ago.
I thought it was fake news, so I tried to phone him. Obviously, he wasn't answering. It's a real tragedy, not only for us as friends and family, but the whole world that know him as a celebrity and a pop singer.
Payne's personal life continued to play out on platforms that had propelled him to fame. His ex-fiancée, Maya Henry, took to social media last week to discuss possible legal action against the singer after repeated contact. Ridicule was rife in recent days too, after the singer's dancing gained unwanted attention. It now paints a different picture, but is all too late, as those who watched him grow from a boy to a man now start to process his death at 31.
If I wasn't in One Direction right now, I would be working in a factory or being a fireman. I like the idea of saving someone.
Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
What about the factory?
The X Factor in 2010 was only the beginning of One Direction's rise to global fame. My next guest was there at the start of that journey. Katie Waisel was a contestant on that series of The X Factor and met Liam Payne during the process. She said he always offered her unwavering support during what was her darkest moments in the competition. Today, the singer-songwriter hit out at the music industry, claiming it treats talent like commodities. I talked to Katie a little earlier today and started by asking about her reaction to the tragic news of...
My heart just goes out to his family, his mum and dad, his sisters, his son, and even to Cheryl. I'm still in shock, to be quite honest with you. I was so fearful that something would happen, and I tried to reach out a good few times recently because I know that he'd been going through a bit of a tough time. And, you know, we're still waiting for confirmation as to what actually happened. But still, I'm still in shock. I really, genuinely, I just cannot believe it. It's so tragic, it's awful.
31, no age at all. Let's go back to when you first met Liam Payne back in 2010 at X Factor, both so young, in your teens. You met him during the auditions and you went all the way through to the final stages of the competition together. What was he like in those early days? He was my absolute pillar of strength, to be transparent. I'm just closing my eyes because all I can see is his big smile. And that's what would just stand out. Every time he'd walk into the room, he would be so happy and he'd just give that big smile. I remember when we met, I think this was during boot camp, and there was just a bunch of us outside the hotel in Wembley. And I remember Niall Horan was playing the guitar and we were all just sitting around and just being silly and singing songs, and we all had such a passion for music. And it just made us all so happy, but little did we know what we were actually in for at all. And I think that's what brought us all so much closer. And with Liam, I mean, he was so grounding. He was so kind to everyone. He always put everybody else first. He was really there for me through some pretty horrific times during the X Factor that I personally went through. And he was there for me during the tour, and then even after the tour had finished. He was just a solid friend with a kind heart, a kind soul, and with such a love and passion for music. Katie, when you talk about your experience of the X Factor, and we've spoken about it before on this programme, you and others did not have a good experience and carry a lot of trauma, PTSD, mental health issues, all sorts of issues from that programme, and it comes back to allegations of terrible safeguarding, all the things you've mentioned on record before. But One Direction seemed to be the exception to that in terms of they went on to huge global fame and looked, to all intents and purposes, very well looked after. But we do know that Liam Payne, not so many years ago, publicly touched on the fact that he struggled with addiction and mental health issues. How much do you trace that back to fame so young and the pressures of it?
I think that perception, or the perception of how One Direction were getting on, the outside world, one would typically and understandably think just that they were the untouchables. But that's not the case whatsoever. I mean, we have all trauma bonded through a shared and similar experience in one which way, shape or form. And especially when the band went on a hiatus and the boys went solo, it is, I think, when they started to find their own feet and their own voice, not just from a singing standpoint, but also digesting what had happened during that process. You know, they were so young during the X Factor. And also to be very frank and transparent, and I think I've said this to you before, once you've been on that show and or associated or affiliated with the likes of, say, Simon Cowell or Psycho Entertainment, you are cattle branded. That's your identity. No matter what you do, that's your identity. And when you're trying to branch away from that, it's very difficult from a mental health standpoint to then re-find your own identity and life purpose if you were perhaps taking, I guess, a different direction in life. But when it comes to addiction and so on and so forth, I mean, it's been rife in the industry for many years. A lot of the times people self-medicate because they're struggling and they don't trust anyone, they don't know who to turn to. And I completely relate and understand, and my heart breaks